Hello and welcome to another podcast from the Peninsula Chamber. This is the Pen Biz Buzz, and my name is Shelley Smith. I'm the liaison for Penn Sherm Society of Human Resource Manager and Management, and I'm here, of course, with the illustrious leader for the Peninsula Chamber of Commerce, Bob.
You always say illustrious leader, and it always catches me by surprise.
But you are.
So I'm Bob McKenna. I am the president and CEO of the Virginia Peninsula Chamber of Commerce, and we're here with another podcast called the Peninsula Biz Buzz, and we're still waiting to hear feedback on that, if that's a good name for this podcast. Today we have with us Vice Admiral retired Dave Architzel, who is an aviator, right, sir?
That's right, yeah.
Naval aviator, and at one point commanded an LPH called USS Guam, and also commanded the base in Iceland. Is that Naval Air Station?
Defense Force Commander of Iceland, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then the Navy Safety Center also, among other things. A very illustrious career in the Navy, and he has stepped into a role, and this initiative was formerly called America Builds and Repairs Great Ships. It was actually formerly called America Builds Great Ships, and then America Builds and Repairs Great Ships. And now it's called the Maritime Industrial Base Ecosystem Initiative. And before I go any further, let me introduce also Alan Baker. And Alan is a longtime defense contractor, 10,000-pound brain, guy who's carrying the lion's share of the Admiral's work at this point, I think, the Admiral's right-hand man, and doing a great job with this initiative, which has been going on for almost a year now. The reason that I asked Admiral Architzel to be on today to talk about this initiative is when you think about the economic vitality of our region, the things that pop into your mind immediately are defense contracting, about 40%. The maritime trades are critical. Obviously, the largest industrial employer in the state of Virginia is Newport News Shipbuilding, but they're surrounded by a lot of other ship repair facilities and shipbuilding facilities in the Hampton Roads area. So I thought this was one of the most important initiatives and issues that we should be talking about on this new podcast. So over to you, sir. I'd like you at first, if you could, to tell us about the origins of this effort.
Okay, well, thank you, Bob and Shelley, for allowing us to share this podcast. Look, I feel compelled to just add a little bit to who I am. 40 years in the Navy, I had 7 tours as an admiral, ranging from the safety center and regional command here, the regional commander of the Commander Naval Region Mid-Atlantic, to commander of Operational Test and Evaluation Force, and then on to roles up in DC, which was the Program Executive Officer for aircraft carriers, both in service and new construction. And then I took the role as the Principal Military Deputy for all acquisition for the Navy under ASN RDA. And my final tour was as Commander of Naval Air Systems Command at Pax River. So 40-year career, which when I came back to the region, I really felt like this is home, and I want to do something post a Navy career that would be enduring. So when you mentioned, Bob, the aspect of why this is important, I think to our people out there listening, this is 70% of the world is covered in water. That's our global commons. If you think about 80% of the population lives within coastal areas, within 100 miles of the coast. 90% of the commerce of the world travels over sea lanes. And if you think about this, it's not just the Navy, in other words, it is about the maritime. And the maritime, if you were to take just the Port of Virginia here, and you were to stack up all the containers that are used worldwide to transport these goods, I was amazed it would wrap around the earth 11 times. That's a lot of transportation that's going on from this region. So to support both the Navy and our mission, and our Navy's mission in a global setting with an unsettled world, means we have to have a Navy that's strong, flexible, adaptable, and maintainable and reliable, right? And so that gets to the crux of what is the industrial base that supports that effort. Now, clearly people point to shipyards and other things, and I was drawn to this discussion at Huntington Ingalls Newport News Shipbuilding actually started which was about America builds great ships. So that focused on one piece of the puzzle, but not all of the puzzle, because as Bill Crow from the Virginia Ship Repair Association accurately pointed out in the first meeting, you cannot build yourself to a Navy that's going to give you that, pick a number, whether it's 300 or 355 or 327. You cannot build your way there. And if you look at today, the ships we have in our inventory today will be the ships that we fight with 20 years from now. By and large, 90% of them will be them, because we can only build today at a very sustained, a rate that is sustainable by budgets and by our capability. So another factor that comes into this then is how healthy is the industrial base that supports the build yards, like Huntington Ingalls Newport News Shipbuilding, and all of the repair yards and small businesses that support those yards. And this is the measure that I took on to say this really is a regional, should be a regional focus, how important this is. Think about it, if you really do, the Navy, $195 billion annual or so. Navy assets measure somewhere about $500 billion. This region is synonymous with Navy. It's synonymous with MSC, by the way. MSC, Maritime. You talking about Sea Lift Command?
Military Sea Lift?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Senior moment, Military Sea Lift Command. And I just was with Admiral Wetlaufer. They're headquartered here in Hampton Roads. And if you look at the importance of maintaining that role, it's more than, it's obviously well past the gray hulls. It's about what we have, both gray hulls and capability to get things done and transported. So he has the same kind of concerns, right, as we're talking Navy, the larger Navy context would have. The Port of Virginia has those concerns. Half the region's GDP is defense related. And if you think about it, on the bases, just on the naval bases within Hampton Roads, 146,000 people working on those bases. And if you add the sailors to it, you'll come to a number just north of 300,000. So that's why this is such a critical issue, and one that has to get regional buy-in, not just the build yards, not just the repair yards, not just a city or a community, but a regional impact. So I looked at this and said, we need to convert a slogan, which is America builds great ships or repairs great ships, to an effort that identifies something we've never looked at before, which is the ecosystem that supports it. That is the Maritime Industrial Base Ecosystem. What was the founding of that? It comes out of, why would that be important? Well, just about 2 years ago, by executive order, there was a study done on the Department of Defense Industrial Base. That study concluded and came out with findings that had multiple areas of concern for the defense industrial base writ large, but specifically broke down into areas like aerospace, aviation, and the maritime. In the maritime sector, when you read that, you will see they called out things like single supplier vendor sources, where you have only one. Used to be there'd be several companies that could have foundries that could make equipment or piece parts for ships, for example. Today we're down to one of, and that one of may be offshore, may not even be in the United States. And I could give examples, but I think you understand the criticality of that nature, that fragility of that supplier vendor base. If you look at the workforce that was also called out, it's not just about volume, but there is a volume piece to it, but it's about the trades that support how we work today versus the trades that we'll need in 5 years or so as we bring on more and more technology like augmented reality, adaptive manufacturing, or digitalization, digital shipbuilding, or things like that. So to get after this, let me give you an example first on the volume piece. If you look at the amount of work that now, we went through a period where, for fiscal reasons, we didn't have the budget to sustain the work that needed to be done on repair yards or the repair of our vessels and maintain them. So what was happening? You were paying for readiness by basically not doing enough on the readiness accounts and using that for other things. If you read the papers and you see it, you can see it in aviation, where they talk about things like strike fighter shortfall, or the lack of readiness of the the Hornet community on the aviation side. That same discussion holds true on the ship side, because we haven't been able to get availabilities done in a timely manner. And or when they did get done, that enough work wasn't being able to be done in those availabilities to satisfy the need. So what happened? We now got 2 years of very good defense budgets, I would say. We've got the yards are full if you look around, and there's more work, there's far more work than we have capacity to get done. So we need to find other ways to get greater efficiencies out of the work processing, contracting, the workforce initiatives, and get things moved through them, and be able to adjust to that new demand signal, which is huge. I would point to you just on the build side as an example. Huntington Ingalls Newport News Shipbuilding is going to be tasked, and has contracts for the carrier program, which now includes not just the forward finishing touches on coming out of their PSA, but post shipyard availability, but also the building of the JFK, which will have its christening very shortly. And then behind it is the Enterprise, which is already under contract. And then CVN 81, yet to be named, is also already been authorized. On top of that, you have the Virginia-class submarines continuing at pace and making them more complex in the same yard. And you have the commitment to replace our aging fleet ballistic submarine fleet with the new Columbia-class submarine. All those are going on alone in the build yard. Meanwhile, in our repair side, we don't have enough dry docks to support the work need to be done. And even if we did, we still got to operate the fleet we have. So it's a daunting challenge, and one that I looked at and said, how can we look at this regionally and come up with a different solution set? And that's what MIBE is based on. It says, look, if we looked at the Maritime Industrial Base in Hampton Roads that we'd like to see in 5 years, what would that be? In a perfect world, no restrictions on budget, on manpower, on ideas, what would it be? And if we had that vision, and we know where we are today, how would we get through desired effects that would allow us to get to that end state, a mission state we think is so critical for the region? We're working on that now, both in some domains. One is workforce, one is manufacturing and innovation, one is supply vendor base, and the other is technology. Let's go forward. All those are fine for us to work on. My message, Bob, to everyone out there in the region would be, it has to be understood that this is a vital interest to this region and how we approach it and how we realize it's not just the Maritime Industrial Base, it's our industrial base, period. If you look at what is being forecast in the state of Virginia, for example, on the offshore, 25 miles offshore, is a huge effort to get to renewable energy sources that are going to be offshore. Who is going to support that industry as it builds out there? Those are not small wind turbines. Those are huge. That whole industry is begging for something to have it. The trades and the capabilities that we have within the Maritime Industrial Base could and should be used to augment that. But how are we going to draw that in? How are we going to draw people into this? The training, the certification, the retention of those people, and the culture that says we want to be in this industry. So in a nutshell, that's what the role of the goal of this MIBE effort is. And it's about to strengthen Hampton Roads' economy through the optimization of this Maritime Industrial Base. And it is not, again, focused on a yard or a community. It is a regional impact, and it's also about what can be used other places that would help this region to establish that vision. I'm going to stop for a while and let Alan Baker talk, but I probably said more than you wanted me to say in the opening gambit anyway.
Let me jump in before Alan starts and say, so this is an initiative that's critical to national security, obviously, and the economic well-being of the Hampton Roads region.
Absolutely.
Among many other, and it's a multifaceted challenge, obviously. One of the things that I am focused on, that the Chamber is focused on, the Peninsula Chamber and the Hampton Roads Chamber, and many other organizations, is workforce development. And I know that is absolutely critical to what MIBE is trying to do. So can you comment on how do we build the workforce that we need to build and maintain a 355 ship Navy, or whatever that number is, for national defense purposes?
Exactly.
Okay, so well, we've taken the step to say, first off, everywhere, everything you initially can take in the maritime will, no matter what conversation you have, it'll come back to workforce. It'll come back to what is your workforce today? What does your workforce need to be in the future? If you don't look to the future of what future skills and do a gap analysis, what would have to be there, you are destined to have the same workforce you have today that you would have in 5 years. That is a recipe for ultimately work going somewhere else, pure and simple. You've got to, if you think you're going to grow your workforce by 1 million people in this region over 5 years, you probably don't have the right solution either. You've got to look for ways that that workforce can get better skills, can use better tools, can get better automation, can do things, not to reduce the workforce, but to optimize that workforce and to provide training and certification that allow them to do better. So I would put it in areas of looking at future skills and a gap analysis to get there. I would look at the certifications of things like pre-hire and getting into, which is done, Visitor today, the Virginia Ship Repair Association is doing a lot of, we're trying to help how we can improve on that program, help them to look at what are the web portals across the region that talk about workforce development and how they're being done. And can we then get a synergy between them that says, look, let's bring this together between VISRA, the Virginia Maritime Association, the Port of Virginia. All these people need people working, right? And then there's a transition program that I think is vital as we look to sailors and what they're in today. We have historically looked at transitioning service members as a way to capture them when they've decided to leave the service. I think I've used the term shooting behind the duck, and I'm not sure it meets with people's pleasure, but if you're hunting at all, if you shoot at a duck, you won't hit the duck. You need to lead it. You need to get out in front of it. And we've got to start getting sailors from the time, and soldiers and airmen and Coast Guardsmen and women who come in and are in those. They're not going to be in there for the whole lifetime. They're going to be in there for a while, and then at some point they're going to want to transition. We want to get them skill sets and certifications that can be applied in the commercial sector, in the private sector, and they can then flow to that thing. You also want to take, it's an old slogan, you recruit the sailor, you retain the family. We need to look at the family holistically. What does that need of that family that'll keep them in Hampton Roads? I don't care if it's on the peninsula, the south side, wherever it happens to be, but we want them to know that the culture is different, that the culture says they're valued, that the culture says this is where you want to come if you want to work in the maritime, and that they do want to work in the maritime. So those are 4 areas I just gave you that we're actively we're working on today, and moving on to that. Alan, can you add something to that?
Sure. Thank you, Arch. I appreciate the opportunity. So that if you take a look historically as what happened in the United States with respect to the growth of regional ecosystems that the Admiral has been talking about, there are 3 outstanding examples. One of them is Silicon Valley in California. Second one is the I-95 corridor in New England. And the last one is the Central Florida Technology Innovation corridor down outside of Orlando. And in each of those cases, what you had was transformational investments that were being made in technologies that were going to change the world in the areas. In the case of Silicon Valley, we're talking about IT. In the case of Central Florida, was optics. And so here we're talking about investments that the Navy is already making. And through Industry 4.0 technologies, Admiral Architzel gave some examples of some of those technologies. Those investments are already being made, and the technologies, the hardware and the software, are already showing up on our surface ships and in our submarines. But to get back to the workforce problem, we're talking now to people in management positions in the shipyards and in the facilities, and they're saying, it's wonderful to see these technologies. These technologies can make to make this fleet competitive and dominant in the maritime sector globally, but we don't have workforces right now. We don't have sailors on one hand, nor do we have civilians working in the shipyards that have the technological skills to maintain and to modernize and upgrade these technologies. The workforce can be the technology, innovative technologies are a savior, but without the workforce in there to backstop that and keep it refreshed and active, it's a killer. It's the Achilles heel in the entire operation. So that what we see, if you take a look again, Silicon Valley, New England, and Florida, in each of those areas, ecosystems got together in the form of a collaborative, in the same way that MIBE, the Maritime Industrial Base Ecosystem, is a collaboration of a large number of stakeholding partners in this area. Collectively, they made a decision to invest in workforce development first and foremost. And so they invested in the development of new curriculum in community colleges, in universities, in state colleges, and through institutes, as we're beginning to see institutes appear in the cities here in Hampton Roads. Hampton has institutes, Newport News has institutes, Virginia Beach has learning institutes that are highly specialized in technologically. The key is for us to sync up the ability of those learning centers with needs for technologies that are 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. This is not pipe dreaming stuff. All we have to do is simply go to the process owners and talk to them about what technology investments they're making today that are going to affect the performance of tomorrow's fleet. And then we craft the workforce curricula in order to meet those needs going forward. That's the kernel of what we're up to, in my view, with respect to workforce development.
That's excellent. So this is all great information. We could talk about this probably for a couple of hours, but I want to get to a couple more points. So at some of the executive committee meetings, I've seen Mike Coleman and Kathleen Jabs from the state. Can you talk, Admiral, about some of the support we're getting for this initiative from the state level?
So, yes, first off and foremost, these are the governor and from right on down through Mike Coleman and the Office of Defense.
So it's Veterans and Defense Affairs.
Yeah, Veterans and Defense Affairs, sorry. If you look, very much interested in everything that goes on here, very supportive of it. And in fact, if you look at this, this is ties into other areas, right? So initiatives like Go Virginia or things that come into that kind of emphasis. But we are giving an area that Go Virginia can say, aha, that's an interest, and we might be able to then play in that more. So if you look at what W. Wynn and others have put forward through this Go Virginia initiative, they're looking for areas to branch out into, to look at other sequels to get involved in. And this idea of how you would knit this together is very much drawing attraction. The governor himself, this past weekend at Brooks Crossing, specifically was calling out this very notion of what it would be and how this is supportive of these initiatives. So I have no doubt in my mind that as this grows in understanding and across the region, that there will be even more and more traction with it. But let me just say one thing that, as we were talking, that I thought about was many times in our quest to say how we're going to maintain a Navy or the maritime force and et cetera, we tend to think that the Navy will give us the answer, that the Navy will develop all these plans. And the Navy is, I'll tell you this, the Navy is looking for the region to come up with some innovative answers. Why do I say that? Let me give you an aviation example that might resonate. If I was Delta Airlines a few years back, they were really suffering from the ability to make on-time schedules and reliability of their aviation fleet. And you can imagine they were struggling to say, 60 or 70% is not exactly what they wanted to hear about. They want to have something on the order of 98% availability. Well, how do you get there? And they didn't know. So they went back and they went into a program to understand how it could be done through academia and doing some things with other people to look at this availability and change that model. They got when they did that, Delta saw a marked increase in their availability. that was picked up by the Air Force and said, well, if you can do that in the civilian aviation side, can we do it with our tanker fleet and our big aircraft? And sure enough, they saw similar results. My take would be we can do a similar effect that says, do we have the right model on how to modernize and sustain our Navy and our maritime ships here? Or can we come up and really look at that and say there's better ways to do this than the classic run it through availabilities with 3-year planning and then come in? You know, I mean, there's some of this is not mobile, it's not agile, it's not effective as you'd want to be, and it certainly it's fraught with areas of concern. So I think those are areas ripe for what we could also come on and look at as we go forward.
Shelley, got any questions?
I have a ton of questions, but we're gonna cut it. Yeah, we're gonna cut it off. Mine was definitely around the workforce development piece. I guess a quick question would be to confirm that the elements of training include the integration of the innovation of AI to the table and what that brings. So I'm seeing the head shake there. That
Absolutely.
should not be something that people should be in fear of. They should welcome it because it brings other opportunities. Really, is there any final comments, how people should contact you for more information in order to get involved, to actually personally get certified, different universities, different colleges that are working with you? So what's the best way to get in touch with all of these resources you've talked about?
Alan?
Well, my email is simple. It's r1baker@odu.edu, and I have the good fortune of being the program manager for the MIBE initiative to support Admiral Architzel in this, and I'm readily reachable through r1baker@odu.edu. And he has an easier email to remember, but this is my specific focus. He has dozens of focuses in addition to this.
Let me just say, Shelley, that on top of all this, and I think Bob, we've talked about this too, there is a culture that this region, as important as this maritime industry is to the region, we have to get and understand that culture within the region. It says it is what this region is, the pearl of the region. It is what is really people want to aspire to be in. And I think in the past we had something that said, I don't want to work in a shipyard or view of it. Those days are gone, in my view. If you look to the future, it's a whole new world with artificial intelligence, with virtual reality, with augmented manufacturing, with all kinds of efforts that would come in and would say, this is not your old days of shipbuilding. This is a whole new matter. And if that culture changes, people will be clamoring to get more and more involved in it, and that is what we need.
Absolutely, completely agree. We thank you for your time today. Bob, do you have any final wrap-ups before we do the final wrap?
Yeah, so in closing, what I'd like to say is, Admiral, I don't know if you remember this, but about 4 or 5 months ago when you and I talked, I told you that I'm involved in many different initiatives. This is right at the top of the list of things that I'm involved in working on, and I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate the fact that, as President Tribble at Christopher Newport University says, we're here to live a life of significance. I think for a long time you've been living a life of significance. We appreciate your leadership, and we appreciate all you're doing for the Hampton Roads area and for national defense. So thanks very much. I look forward to continued work on this and some big wins in the near future.
All right.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Can I let me say something, because I want to go on top of that. One last thing. I had command of a great warship. It was Theodore Roosevelt, CVN 71. I was XO on 2 carriers, but that carrier, 71, named after Theodore Roosevelt, a great president of the United States, and TR was noted for saying there can be no greater satisfaction in life than working hard at a job that's well worth doing. I view this as such a job. It's not something that I'm going to shed or get rid of. I appreciate the fact, Bob, that you've seen it and you're taking it on, and Alan is doing a great job, but ultimately it's going to require all the region to understand that same thing. This is a job that's well worth doing. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All hands on deck.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you again. Signing off from Pen Biz Buzz. I got to get that new title down, Bob.
All
All
right.
right. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thanks.